welcome to the Historical Village for our second true Twilight Talk. Those of you who endured the cold and windy conditions at our first talk can confirm it was a genuine Sanibel experience. We braved the weather like the original settlers, sort of. Can I see a show of hands for those people who were here last week? Thank you, or 2 weeks ago. Thank you for coming back and giving us a second chance, okay? The weather is improving incrementally. And clearly you have warmed up since then. I hope we don't cool you off tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Tracy Tenney, who's running around with the camera, for envisioning this topic and lining up speakers in this day of COVID. It's a terrific idea, and we are very excited. Also, we'd like to thank the city for giving us guidelines on hosting. Please remember to wear your masks and socially distance. We're a small group, so we should be able to do that pretty easily. There is a restroom available should you need it up the steps into Shore Haven. It's behind a door with a sign that says private on it. Finally, we ask you please to remain seated until the end of the program. We'll have a short question and answer period. You have little note cards. If you have a question, please write it down, and Tracy will collect those as we come to the end of the presentation. Sanibel's settlers, late 1800s up through mid-century, 20th century, dealt with the challenges of living here. The heat, the humidity, the hurricanes, the remoteness, and the bugs. Mosquito density was legendary. For good reason, Sanibel was known as the pest hole of the United States. These days, the main bugs you hear people complain about are what? No-see-ums. I've never seen anything that the old-timers talk about no-see-ums. It was all mosquitoes. Here today to share the story of how Sanibel went from pest hole to paradise, we have two representatives from the Lee County Mosquito Control District, the LCMCD, and I bet they can say that very fast. For over 10 years, Eric Jackson has been with the Control District, currently serving as Deputy Director of Public Information and Education. With an undergraduate degree from Western Michigan University and an advanced degree from Florida Gulf Coast University, Eric began his professional career as an educator in the Chicago suburbs. In 2008, he joined his wife at the Sanibel School, where they both were teachers. He left his position as fifth grade teacher to begin his career in mosquito education for LCMCD. Eric continues to maintain his ties with the island, noting, "In my role as Deputy Director, I'm in constant communication with the City of Sanibel regarding our treatments, and we work closely with J.N. Ding Darling Wildlife Refuge and SCCF to manage the vast mosquito breeding grounds on those properties. An avid outdoorsman, Eric appreciates the natural wonders of Southwest Florida and in keeping its people and that environment healthy." Our other speaker today has family ties to the island. Andrea Miller's great-grandparents, Charles and Leela Rhodes, came to Sanibel in the mid-1940s. They were followed in 1951 by her grandparents and their children. Some of you may remember Ray Rhodes from our last Fishy Twilight Talk. Andrea's father, Ray, grew up on the island and was the City of Sanibel's first police officer. Her mother, the late Mary Rhodes, taught at the Sanibel School. And Andrea, for over 10 years, worked for the City of Sanibel as Recreation Director. She also assisted the city manager with special projects from 2010 to 2018. Andrea holds degrees, an undergraduate degree from Indiana University, as well as a master's degree in public administration. She began her professional life as a teacher, and obviously her students loved her because she earned honors in Fort Myers as a Golden Apple finalist. Currently, she serves as education coordinator for the Lee County Mosquito Control District. In that position, she is committed to developing programming that teaches students of all ages, like us, to make connections to the environment and its sustainability. And now, for our program, Taking a Bite Out of Sanibel, the Mosquito Story, let's welcome Eric Jackson and Andrea Miller.
Well, thank you very much for having us. This is a totally different type of venue than anything I have ever done in terms of speaking to people. I am very thankful, though, to have come 2 weeks ago to see Ray and his friends speak and set the precedent for being able to not tell anything truthful. So I think if I mess up the facts or the numbers, I'm fine, right? So it's really great to be here on Sanibel. Again, when I moved here to Fort Myers with my wife, we had no intention of really moving to Florida. We lived in Chicago. We loved it. I'm from Michigan originally. But we just said we're going to move somewhere else in the country, experience it for a couple of years, and then go back to the Midwest. We just wanted to do something. Well, this place has a way of really anchoring you in and keeping you here. And we are so glad that we never left. And I'm very thankful to have Andrea here, who has some real history on this island, to be able to talk a little bit about her experiences. And then I want to really highlight how important this island, not just this part of Florida, but this island is to mosquito control, mosquito research, and public health. And I don't think that a lot of people realize how important this place was to really shaping how mosquito control is done all around the world. And it really started here in a large part in controlling what you guys all have been bitten by probably within the last couple of days as it warmed up. So I want to go ahead and hand it to Andrea to go ahead and tell us a little about her history.
All right, well, thank you very much, Eric. And as you all heard, as part of the introduction, my roots for my family go back to the 1940s on this island. So as you can imagine, I grew up hearing a lot of tales about the old days on the island. So many of you that grew up maybe up north heard from your grandparents, your parents, that they had to walk uphill both ways in the snow to school. But I grew up hearing tales of being carried away by mosquitoes and having to wear long sleeves and long pants in the heat of the summer, and having to wear that 612 in DEET. And when you go outside to play on the playground, you'd have mouthfuls of mosquitoes and sand gnats. So a very different struggle for those people that were living out on the islands prior to the inception of the Mosquito Control District. So many of the Sunday chores that I heard of for those that grew up on the island, one of the typical chores would be to take all the screens off the house, rinse them, wash them, then recoat them with Gulf oil and DEET to help keep the mosquitoes and the sand gnats out. And I think of that sometimes in the heat of the summer when I'm in my house with the air conditioning, what that must have been like to try to sleep in those conditions, no air conditioning, no fans. Also maintaining those smudge pots that were kept on the corner of the homes just to try to get some relief from the mosquitoes that loved this island. When I teach 5th grade, I always say, we talk about Sanibel Island and some of the records and the research, and I always say Sanibel was like Disney World for mosquitoes. It was perfect. It was everything they wanted and more. So the 5th graders can always relate to that connection. But one story that I heard growing up that I found very interesting was how mosquitoes could even chase people away before they stepped foot on the island. And that story goes back to who would have been my great uncle, Joe Harris. He was married to my grandmother's sister, so my grandma Eula Rhodes. She had a sister, Trudy, and she was married to this property developer, Joe Harris. And Joe Harris was known for buying property in Longboat Key at the time and played a key role in developing that area. So when my grandparents came here in the 1950s, Joe said, "Hey, Glenn, you like it there?" "Yeah, I like it." "Well, I'll give you some money. Why don't you buy up some property? I really think that we could develop this, and make some money." So Glenn said, okay. So he bought up property along what is like Victoria Way and Lindgren now, and also down Sand Cap and VFW, the curve there. So once all the transactions were finalized, Trudy and Joe got on their boat from Longboat Key, and they came on down to Sanibel, and they were going to meet Glenn down by the dock by the old Bailey store. Glenn was the butcher there. So Glenn finally gets down there to find Joe pacing on the boat and frantically smoking cigars, just trying to keep the mosquitoes off of him. And he says, "What are you thinking? Who would ever want to live here? This place is a pest hole. It's a nightmare. Sell it. I don't want any of this property. Get rid of it. For your time and trouble, keep some of it if you want, but I want nothing to do with developing this place." So he sold the land to Hugo Lindgren, now the area of Lindgren Way, sold the property down along Sand Cap and VFW Curve, kept a little bit for himself, where they later moved down along Sand Cap Road. So before people would even set foot on this island, they would experience what the mosquitoes were like. So the other thing that always sticks with me, too, is once mosquito control was developed in 1958 and they had a presence on the island, my dad would always tell stories of how the fog truck was more popular than any ice cream truck ever was in any city anywhere in the United States. So just to try to get some relief from those pests. So with that, I will turn it back over to Eric and let him kind of give you a taste of how mosquito control came to be here in the history.
So how many of you are familiar with Wayne Miller? Anybody know T. Wayne Miller, who started the Lee County Mosquito Control District? Prior to our district being formed, there were many other districts that were formed throughout the state of Florida, and it was really just like our district. They were formed through a mandate from the state of Florida. It said in order to get people to move down here, be comfortable, and not deal with things such as malaria, which you really don't hear about anymore, there needs to be some uniform method of control for these different areas that are going to protect people, that are going to make sure that people don't come down and then end up running away because it's just not habitable. Now, the first mosquito control district that was formed in Florida was the Indian River Mosquito Control District in the 1920s. And then you fast forward the decades into the 50s, we're actually a pretty young district in the state of Florida. And there are no more mosquito control districts that are being made as of 1980. So there's a variety of them. There's either special districts like ours, which you could consider us kind of like a fire district. We're our own government. We have our own elected commissioners. Many people confuse us with being part of Lee County because it's in our name, but we are not part of Lee County. We're our own district. There are other districts in the state of Florida that are called dependent districts, to where they actually have their own standalone unit, but they do report to a board of commissioners. So it's almost like a hybrid. And then you have county programs, either in public works or others that do it. Well, when T. Wayne Miller came down here, charged with starting the Lee County Mosquito Control District, one of the biggest projects that he started with was right here on Sanibel Island, and it was due to the research of Dr. Maurice Provost. Have you ever heard of that name before? I've got some pictures here of the research that was done starting in 1949. The Florida Board of Health said we need more information on mosquitoes, what's going on with mosquitoes, the problems that they pose, not only for Southwest Florida, but for the rest of the state. So Maurice Provost was commissioned to come down here and do a 3-year study. He started in 1949, right over at the Sanibel Lighthouse. They were able to get permission to use the lighthouse as their quarters. And from that point on, he conducted 3 major studies that were just monumental to mosquito control throughout the world. The first was to study the basic biology of mosquitoes. It was they first saw mosquitoes mating here on Sanibel Island, seeing how it happened, how when the males would hatch off first as the adults, and then they'd hang around and wait for the ladies. They would come up, and then you would have that, what we call a mating ball-like dance, to where you see them all clustered. Other insects do that as well. So they monitored how that actually happened. That was one of the things of studying the biology. Also finding how long did they take to go through that full life cycle. Another, which was where you started to get into the record making, was how many salt marsh mosquitoes here could actually grow in the amount of land, the amount of salt marsh that was here. What was discovered was that in 1 square foot of salt marsh, you would find anywhere from 1,000 to 39,000 mosquito eggs in a square foot. Now, you really start to see the immensity of the problem here in Lee County with the fact that we have over 60,000 acres of salt marsh. We have more salt marsh in Lee County than 5 counties combined on the east coast of Florida. So this was obviously the place to be to study the black salt marsh mosquito, which is the most predaceous, I shouldn't say pestiferous would be the better word, of the mosquitoes here in Florida. I mean, one of the worst. The other study that he did prior to coming to Sanibel was studying Mansonia, which is another very pestiferous mosquito. So he got that information out there, and then the other really important one was they discovered the flight range, and that had long impacts on the rest of the county and helped to shape our control efforts that we even do today. So back in the 50s, we're still using that research today with what we do. That is, they found that the mosquitoes on Sanibel Island could fly as far inland as LaBelle. They could leave the county. So if the winds are right, depending on where they're coming from, and they live long enough, you would find mosquitoes that they dusted with a marking powder as far inland in traps as LaBelle. So it was really monumental. Also, you've all heard of what makes another famous thing about Sanibel is the fact that at the lighthouse, the record for mosquitoes caught in a trap, that was part of that study that Dr. Provost did. So lots of good research came from that, and it had long-lasting impacts not only on mosquito control and other programs, even throughout the country and other parts of the world. There are places in Australia that have similar habitats to here, subtropical mangrove swamps, that use that information to help their own programs. Another thing that was really monumental and actually changed Sanibel forever was the research he did just on the topography of Sanibel. And I don't know if I found out you can find this on the My Sanibel site, but there is a paper that he wrote called The Water Table of Sanibel Island. And in this, he documents the topography of the island and his recommendations for how to not only help with the water quality here and the amount of fresh water that would be on the island, but also impact the mosquito problem and actually find a way to handle that without having to use as many pesticides. How many of you are familiar with DDT? You've all heard of it before. And how come we don't use DDT anymore? It's because it's stays in the environment. It's very persistent. This hydrocarbon is out there for a long time, and it was used and in many cases overused. However, DDT is responsible for really stopping malaria from being widespread in the country. It's not just because it was devastating to certain types of birds and their ability to really produce shells that were strong enough for them to be with. It was also because mosquitoes were becoming resistant to it. And you don't really hear that much about it. You hear that it was, okay, this was just a bad pesticide that was being used. The truth was it wasn't really working anymore, especially here on Sanibel with the salt marsh mosquito. They were becoming resistant to it. So what Dr. Provost said is, look, we've got to find other ways to control this problem. Pesticides aren't going to do it alone. The Sanibel Slough was his recommendation for channeling water in and out and making it to where you would have larger volumes of water there that would keep that area flooded permanently to where you would not have large numbers, those 40,000 mosquitoes growing per square foot in that area. So it was an engineering project, which then led to the engineer by the name of T. Wayne Miller to coming down and forming the Lee County Mosquito Control District and starting much of his work right here on Sanibel Island. So the Sanibel Slough was one of the first projects that was done by the Lee County Mosquito Control District. We partnered with that engineering group to go ahead and do that. And then it moved on to the J.N. Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge. All of you, I'm sure, have driven on Wildlife Drive. That drive was actually put in place by Lee County Mosquito Control District. And the purpose wasn't necessarily to have a nice drive for people to go in and to be able to see the wildlife. That's a great benefit of having that. The purpose was, again, to keep water in and inundate that salt marsh to keep it there so mosquitoes could not lay their eggs on that moist ground. There's a lot of mosquitoes that lay their eggs right on the surface of the water. But the salt marsh mosquito needs to have the water go away for it to lay it on the ground, and then they lay dormant. When the water comes in, when those tides come in, it floods those eggs, and that's what kickstarts that life cycle. So by flooding that area, you didn't have as many places for those mosquitoes to grow. In the end, it created a perfect habitat for lots of migratory birds, more and more migratory birds to come in, for fish, natural predators to come in once they started channeling that water back and forth. It was a win-win not only for the U.S. Forest or the Fish and Wildlife Service, but also for the Lee County Mosquito Control District, because far less pesticide had to be used, far less labor had to go into controlling the mosquitoes when it was naturally being controlled or through that engineering effort. It's one of the only places in Lee County where we actually have a dike put in to control mosquitoes. How many of you been over to the Indian River Lagoon on the other side of the state? That is mostly impoundments in that area. That was all done prior to many environmental regulations coming in, looking at how tidal flow went. You couldn't even do what we did with Ding Darling or with the Sanibel Slough today. I don't think it would be something that would be possible, or it would be a very, very long project to do it that way. So that really set the stage for that. So the reason why, getting back to when we first started talking, the reason why we don't have the inundation of mosquitoes today, like it was back as Andrew was talking about, is in big part because of the slough, because of what was done on the refuge, but it's also because in advancements of mosquito control. It's not just waiting until they become flying adults to control them anymore. We're very fortunate that we have a very robust program. Over the years, people have put in a lot of effort, a lot of resources, a lot of money into the district. So we are able to control about 80% of our effort through larvicide. Larvicide means we go in and we kill the mosquitoes in their larval form before they come out as biting adults. And it's much more environmentally friendly to do it that way. It's actually much more efficient. Because you think about it, if you have 40,000 mosquitoes coming out of a square foot, and I told you that those mosquitoes could fly 30 miles, I mean, how much easier is it to get them at the source than it would be once they hatch off? So that's what we spend most of our time going after. You have all seen our helicopters flying over. You've seen our trucks going down the road. We are constantly surveying this island. Everywhere, every day we are out. Aside from like this time of year, we don't have to work as many weekends, but throughout the summer it is often we're out 7 days a week. Mosquitoes don't take time off for the weekends. They keep growing. We also don't take holidays. That's another thing. Even on you may wonder why there's a helicopter flying around on Labor Day or on Memorial Day. It's because mosquitoes don't take Memorial Day off either. We have to go after them. Everything starts with surveillance. When we get out there, we've got to see that the mosquitoes are actually a problem. We can't just say, okay, we're assuming that the mosquitoes are growing here, so we're going to go ahead and put out the bacteria that we use, or we're going to go out and put the chemical that we use to kill them. We have to go out and do counts for everything. So it starts with surveillance, and then once we determine that that's what we have to, that we're going to go ahead and get them, we've got a limited time to do that. It takes about 5 to 7 days in the heat for a mosquito to go from an egg to a biting adult. To get into the biology and not get too technical, you guys all remember, can you think back to kindergarten? Anybody? Okay. So, do you remember when you first started learning about metamorphosis of a butterfly and how as an insect grows, those that go through complete metamorphosis, they start out as an egg and they become the larva, the pupa, and then the adult. We primarily get the mosquito in the larval stage. And the job of the larva of any insect is to eat, to consume as much as they can, to get as much energy as they can to go through those changes. So we use bacteria that we put in the water that the mosquito larvae will eat, and it will kill the mosquito larvae. There are growth hormones that we can put in the water that just impact the mosquito larvae to where it tricks them into pupating too quickly, and then they don't become the adults. So there's a lot of different types of products and materials that we can use. The key is we have to do it when they're in the larval stage. Once they become the pupa, it's too late. You typically are going to have to wait until they become an adult, and then you're going to see our trucks going down the road trying to get them. So if we could get all, I always joke with our adulticiding department, the ones that go after them, as I say, our job is really to put you out of work. If we can get them all as larvae, then that's amazing. That's what we want to do. It's impossible, really. I hate to say the word impossible, but it would be very, very difficult to do that. So we get them at larvae first. We've got trapping programs, not only that we have truck-based traps that go indiscriminately and go on 2-mile routes to track what's flying in the air. We also set permanent traps out every night. And then we put out special traps. If we see that there's an area where there's really seem to be a big problem, we'll deploy those traps there. That's how we get all of that information. We also have a very extensive arbovirus program. And that is, it's not just about the nuisance that mosquitoes can cause here. There's also a big public health risk associated with mosquitoes. The black salt marsh mosquito is not one that's known to spread disease to people. Okay, it's just more of a nuisance mosquito. And I say that because most people would not be affected by that. It is a major dog heartworm vector. So if you have pets, you need to make sure that those pets are getting their dog heartworm medication, because salt marsh mosquitoes can spread that little parasite. There are people who have been affected by it. If you have a very, very weakened immune system, sometimes those those parasites can take hold. But it's not something that we're thinking as a major public health risk with that particular mosquito. However, as the summer rains come in and the salinity changes, you get another type of mosquito that comes in called the Culex. It's another genus. That's a freshwater mosquito. That one is capable of spreading West Nile virus, St. Louis encephalitis, Eastern equine encephalitis, and some other nasty diseases. So we have to trap and detect if any of those mosquitoes have virus in their bodies. So we collect them, grind them all up, take the juices from them, and then we can see if they're carrying any of those viruses. Another thing we do is we have sentinel chickens that we keep all over the county. We've got a pen right here near Bowman's, and we take blood samples from the chickens to see if they have picked up any of these viruses, because a lot of those viruses I mentioned are harbored in birds. So one of the benefits of being on Sanibel is you see all the beautiful migratory birds that come here every year. One of the detriments of Sanibel is you see all the beautiful migratory birds that come here that are also could be carrying some of those viruses. And then once they get in that local mosquito population can then start transmitting eventually to people, and that's what we don't want. We have had West Nile virus detected here on Sanibel in our chicken population. Thankfully, we haven't had any human cases here on the island that we've detected. And not to scare anybody, but most people who get West Nile virus don't actually react to it. I mean, I know you've heard about it in the news, but about 80% of people who get it, it's asymptomatic. You wouldn't even know you had it, and then your body fights it and it's gone. About just under 20%, the other 20%, you might have mild symptoms from it, maybe a headache, flu-like symptoms. It seems like every time, I mean, pretty much anything people think is COVID now, but it's a lot of the similar symptoms. You just don't feel good. And then less than 1 in 150 may have serious side effects from it, which can lead to that encephalitis, a swelling of the brain, can lead to death. So it's something that we do have to take pretty seriously. So it's not just, again, the nuisance mosquitoes. We also are really focused on protecting the public health from those viruses. To get back to the history again, another monumental study that wasn't related to mosquitoes, but is something that's kind of coming around again, that's putting this island and actually Captiva as well on the map, is what's called sterile insect technique. And this is really monumental because, again, like I said, we can't just rely on pesticides due to resistance, and you rapidly start running out of the tools when you're just using pesticides. You got to look at other methods. Sterile insect technique is where you actually sterilize the mosquito and you use it to deploy out into the wild to mate with the wild population and drop that population. And when we talk about it now, it seems like, okay, should we really be doing that? That sounds kind of like scary science, but it's been done for decades. In the 1950s, there was a screwworm fly that was here that was eradicated through sterile insect technique, to where they actually got rid of the screwworm fly by putting out sterile males and then stopping that from spreading. Today, we are actively releasing Aedes aegypti sterile males. It's another type of mosquito, an invasive mosquito that shouldn't even be here, but one that can spread dengue fever and chikungunya and Zika virus. You've got it here on the island. We are releasing sterile male mosquitoes to mate with those wild females that are out here to plummet the population. And it's been a 3-year process to do that. Our district actually worked with the International Atomic Energy Association of all groups. I mean, this is the same group that goes into Iran to make sure that they're not putting missiles together. They got this small group as part of the agency that actually deals with sterile insect technique. And we've been working with them to irradiate mosquitoes. Now, we're not using like nuclear energy or anything like that to do it. We don't need full security at our compound. We're using X-ray technology. So the same technology that's used when you go to the dentist and get X-rayed, if we get the right amount of dosage and X-ray those mosquitoes, it renders them sterile. But it doesn't hurt them enough to where they can't fly out and mate with the females. So that's another positive and an innovative thing that we're doing. We'll be the first in the country, first in the world actually, to X-ray Aedes aegypti mosquitoes and bring that population down. So that's something that we're pretty proud of. Another thing that our district is doing that is innovative, we've been doing it for 30 years, it also has roots to Sanibel Island, is our education program. And public education is a very important part of mosquito control. We always talk about how we practice what's called IPM, which is integrated pest management. Like I said, there isn't one method for stopping mosquitoes from becoming a problem. You've got chemical control, mechanical control, where we manipulate the environment. We also have education. That's a really important thing. Wayne Miller decided back in the early 1980s that something needed to be done about getting the message out about what mosquito control was about and what we do. Somewhere it was kind of lost, the efforts that mosquito control did for the Sanibel Slough, what we did with Ding Darling, and it almost became an adversarial relationship with the environmental community and with our district, because many people felt that, all they're doing is spraying chemicals and they're killing everything, and they don't have the concern for the environment that they should. Well, Mr. Miller's view on it was, we can kind of yell back and forth about, no, we're right, no, we're right, no, we're right. But he said what we really need to do is educate people about what it is that we're doing, not just the history of why, but of why we're doing it. And he said, what better way to do that than to educate our young people? So instead of just hiring a public relations person to go out and speak to people, he said, we're going to hire a teacher. We're going to fund a teaching position in the Lee County School District. He was friends with the superintendent at the time, and he said they had an environmental education program that was very robust, known nationwide in the Lee County School District. We are going to pay for a teacher who is going to focus on environmental education, but explain how mosquito control ties into that. And asked the superintendent, do you know of anybody, can you think of anybody who would be interested in not only doing this for us, but building a curriculum and a program for the mosquito control district? The superintendent said, yeah, I do know somebody. He's a young teacher. He teaches at the Sanibel School. He teaches 5th grade. His name is Neil Wilkinson. And he was hired in 1987 and was brought in. At first, Neil Wilkinson said, no, I care about the environment. I'm not going to work for mosquito control. So you could see that was kind of the idea there, was that it needed to be taken care of. So he convinced him. He had him over to dinner. He said, look, this is what you're going to do. This is your budget. This is what you have to work with. Will you make it happen? And he did. And within a couple of years, not even 2 years, there was so much demand from teachers wanting Neil to come in and teach the science of mosquito control and tie it into the environment that they hired another position. And they brought in another teacher. And then that went on for another decade, about 15 years, and then they hired a third teacher. And I actually was a 5th grade teacher, same as Neil Wilkinson, at the Sanibel school when Neil said to me, would you be interested in coming in and continuing on this program? So it was just, there are a lot of roots to Sanibel, is what I'm saying. And it's been a very effective program. Over 20,000 students now a year have, even during this, I mean, this is all credit to Andrea, and her team, but even in this pandemic, I think you've broken another record for the number of students that you've been able to see, virtually, obviously. But getting the information out to the public is so important, because the more that people understand what they can do to protect themselves, but also not grow mosquitoes around their homes, the less that we have to go out and do those treatments, and the less chemical that we have to use. And and the healthier people will be. So it's been a very positive program. Do you want to talk a little bit about the education program?
Sure. So with our education program, this past year, we were able to reach, as Eric said, 20,000 students, even once we were pivoting to a virtual format. And our program, we reach kindergarten, 5th grade, 7th grade, and then high school biology and chemistry. And every single one of our programs are tied back to Florida's state standards, our curriculum standards, which are called the Next Generation State Sunshine Standards. So with our program, it was very interesting. Just one example today, I was at Colonial Elementary teaching 5th grade. Teaching about the life cycle of the mosquito is what we teach on the very first day we're there. The kids are sketching, and we show them, we bring in what mosquito larva looks like so they can identify it if they see it. And I had 2 kids in one 5th grade classroom raise their hand and say, Mrs. Miller, I thought those were tadpoles. They're all in my dog's bowl outside. Or, Mrs. Miller, that's in my mom's bird bath. I said, okay, when you go home, go get your parents. So really instilling that at a very young age. I mean, kindergarten, we read a story about mosquitoes and their life cycle. They create their own mosquito craft. 5th grade is very intensive as far as time. It's a 3-day program, but all of it incorporates hands-on, real-world ties to science, but also supporting our teachers, tying it back to the state standards, because they are all taxed for time, for budget. Right now there's no travel. So how can we bring those experiences from the field into the classroom and make those connections for kids? And then once we reach the high school, we're doing labs in biology and chemistry showing the real life application of the control methods that Eric referenced today. And then also we're really working to grow that intern program with our local universities and even beyond with FSW, FGCU, and hopefully this summer even partnering with UF to get some more researchers down here working with us at Lee County.
I think that what really sets this organization apart for how we do our educational outreach is that, and it really started with Neil when he started the program, being an environmentalist, being very active in the environmental community. He told Mr. Miller, I don't want to come in as the advocate for mosquito control and the advocate for the use of pesticides and chemicals and all that. That's not what I want to do. Our goal should be to teach students to think critically about things, to be more scientifically literate in how the world works. And that has stuck with it all the way through when I did it, and I know that Andrea's carrying that forward today. We want people to be critical thinkers. We want to get those ideas of, we often hear, and it's not just students who say this, there are adults who say, don't you have like natural forms of control? Why don't you use like natural repellents? Why don't you use natural things? All natural things are even better. And I respond and I say, well, all natural, be careful when you hear that term all natural, And especially when people are trying to sell you something, saying that, hey, this is all natural, this is good for you. Arsenic is all natural. Anthrax is all natural. So it's just you gotta really think about what it is that you're looking at, and it's those types of things that we want to instill in people so they make informed decisions, and that's all about thinking critically. And I think that's what's really great about the program that Andrea is leading now. So all of those things that we do have really put Lee County mosquito control on the map as one of the premier districts. And again, we inherited it. I mean, this is all from years and years of research that really all started, at least locally, with what Dr. Provost did here on Sanibel Island. So I'm guessing there might be some questions. I didn't see a lot of people writing. But if you have any questions on anything, I want to make sure I have lots of time for that. So I think you collect the cards. Is that how you do it? And then I'll read them. I tried to, again, and I know I went kind of back and forth. I tried to make it as confusing as I could, so you would want to research more and learn more. And one thing I want to tell you, there's a couple of books that are great that are available. This one you probably have seen, Protecting Sanibel and Captiva Islands. There's a lot of information, even on mosquito control. I don't know if you may even sell it here. I'm not sure, but this book is a really good one. And then if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of mosquito control in Florida, there's a book by Gordon Patterson. He is the premier historian for all things mosquito control, not just in Florida, but also he wrote another book called The Mosquito Crusades. This is the Mosquito Wars. And he's a historian here in Florida. This is a fascinating read if you're into mosquito control.
Okay, we have questions, and I don't know about you, but I've been fascinating. Here's the first one. Have there been any mosquito-borne diseases on Sanibel or in Lee County?
Yes. There have been, and I did mention West Nile virus. We actually did have a human case of West Nile virus here in Lee County, and I'm not sure how long ago it's been since we've had that. The challenge with determining where these diseases come from varies on the mosquito. For instance, the Culex mosquito can kind of move around. That's the one that can spread West Nile virus and St. Louis encephalitis. So you may have someone, when the health department tracks this, you may have someone who has symptoms. They go to a hospital or a doctor, they run a test on them, and they determine that, okay, this is West Nile virus. Then they need to do some tracking. Well, where were you in the last so many days? In some cases, and in many times, we have what are called imported cases. So you might have people who are sick here with it, but it's because they came from somewhere else. So yes, West Nile virus is something that we have had here. We do detect that. It has been pretty much every year we've detected in the chickens. Like I said, it is in bird populations. Dengue fever was one that we've had imported cases of. Thankfully, we've had no reported local cases where it's acquired. That is spread by the Aedes aegypti mosquito. Again, because of the type of mosquito, the Aedes aegypti is not like the salt marsh. It doesn't fly 30 miles. It'll only fly about 400 feet at most. So if someone contracts it here, chances are that mosquito is growing somewhere around that area or within that neighborhood. So.
Okay, we have another question. This is one I had as well. Could you go into more detail about the Sanibel Slough and what they originally did there?
Okay, so this is where I'm gonna turn into Ray and start making up stuff. There's a lot. I'm not an expert on it. I want to say that initially, but basically what was happening is you had the center of the island, and I may go ahead and do the research too to make sure I'm saying this correctly. But based on everything that I've read, you have the center of the island where you had some fresh water, and in the winter that fresh water would go back down to where it would dry up. That area would then become exposed to where you would have lots of places for mosquitoes to grow. So when Provost did his research on it, he found that, okay, what we need to do is you need to have a way to where you can dig these wells that will supplement that water, but also have these channels that will go in to be able to recycle that water and move it back and forth, but keep it at a level to where you would stop the mosquitoes from breeding so prevalently. So that project changed. Like when you look at how the slough is today, it's because of the research that was done there, and then T. Wayne Miller and Lee County Mosquito Control coming in and doing that. They had a water, there was something at Tarpon Bay to where they helped control the water as it would come in. And aside from that, along with the Ding Darling project, there was some resistance to when that was done from some people who were very worried about if you didn't have proper movement of water, it was going to affect the wildlife there. But they did put in those systems to where water would come back and forth. So that, I know that probably sounded jumbled and now you're even more confused, but that's essentially what the slough was about, was to try to keep more water in there to prevent the mosquitoes from growing.
Well, I know when I was teaching, I would love to have had audiences, classes listening as well and asking questions. Okay, there are a lot of really good ones. Are there more freshwater or saltwater mosquitoes on Sanibel? What's the difference between the two?
Okay, so you want to answer this one? Or you want me to? Okay. So I feel like I'm hogging the microphone.
He said I'm the one that talks a lot when we started.
Yes. So there are more species of freshwater mosquitoes. So that's one way to put it. There are way more in population of salt marsh mosquitoes here. So the Aedes taeniorhynchus is what you have the most of, that black salt marsh mosquito. But like I said, the salinity changes and you get different species of culex. You will have even Anopheles, which the Anopheles mosquito also is a freshwater mosquito. That's the one known to spread malaria. Thankfully, we don't have malaria here now. But there are more freshwater species, including the Aedes aegypti, some of the urban ones that like to live around our homes. But in terms of sheer numbers, way more salt marsh mosquitoes. And what it means is they can survive in the salt environment. So they can survive in salt water where there are other mosquitoes that need to have fresh water.
Okay, here is a question about the life cycle of a female. Do they mate only once and die?
They do mate once, but they don't immediately die. So what happens is they will mate with a male, and then they go in search of a food source. So they actually get their energy from plants. So that's one way to kind of look at it, is for their own food, for their own nourishment, so they can survive. They're actually vegetarians. All mosquitoes are, males and females. The only reason that they take a blood meal is so they can get the protein to develop the eggs, so they can lay the eggs. So if they were to mate and then bite and then die, you wouldn't have disease spread. And that actually would be a good thing if that happened. But what they do is they take a blood meal, they lay a brood of eggs, then they go take another blood meal, lay a brood of eggs, then they go take another blood meal, and it's through that process that certain mosquitoes are able to spread disease. Most female mosquitoes, just in general, they may live 3 to 4 weeks. Males only live about a week. So with males, that's what happens. They emerge, they mate with the females, and then they die. So much shorter life, about a week for a male.
Okay, we have questions about mosquito control. Are there any chemicals used in the process today?
Yes, there are. The primary adulticiding chemical that we use is called dibrome, which is NALED. It's an organophosphate. And it's something that is put out in a very, very small droplet, and it basically aerosolized. So when our aircraft fly over, they fly at about 300 feet in our fixed wing aircraft. That comes out of the back of the aircraft, and it cycles through the air. So what's different about how we do mosquito control, and if you were to hire like a private pest company to come in and deal with the mosquitoes in your yard, is what we put out there is not intended to stay out there very long. When you have a private pest company come in, they may go and spray all of your bushes and all of your hedges, and the purpose in that is to create a barrier to where if a mosquito lands on it, it's going to kill that insect. What we're doing, we are killing the mosquitoes that are in flight. So that's why we fly at night. A lot of people will ask me, they'll say, I used to see your aircraft all the time. Do you not have planes anymore? We do. We're out there at night, but we're flying at sunset, and we will continue on depending on the mission until about 2 a.m., and then we shut it down. And it's based on the research showing when mosquitoes are in flight. Dibrome, malathion is still used in some places. It's resistant. Mosquitoes are resistant to it here on Sanibel, so we don't use it anymore. And then we also use some pyrethrins and permethrins. There's a whole toolbox that we use, and we have to rotate these things because if you use something over and over and over again, there is that chance of resistance building up. And we do all our own in-house testing as well. We do field validation to make sure that what we're using is still effective.
Okay, you talked about airplane coverage. This question is, how efficient is helicopter spraying? It seems like coverage would be poor.
It's actually, when it comes to that, it's actually much better, especially for Sanibel, to use a rotor-winged helicopter versus the fixed wing. And it really has to do with how this island is situated and the way the wind moves. We have used fixed wing. We've used our DC-3 going over Sanibel. The problem is you got to make sure it can take about I don't know 20 minutes or so, sometimes 30 minutes for that to actually start making its way down to the ground level. So when that plane goes over and it comes out of the plane, it cycles through the air and it very, very slowly starts coming down. So any mosquitoes that are in there, they get a little droplet on them, that's what's going to kill them. If it's too windy, if it's not right, we can't go out and do it. It's just not as effective. With a helicopter, which is what we started using out here, even for nighttime treatments, they can get much lower to the canopy and get it out so it's more effective. The other thing is you can't do the type of larviciding treatments that, when you see our helicopters and they're flying right over the treetops and then you see them do a big ag turn and they get back online. You just can't do that in a plane. You've probably seen the crop dusters out east. I can't imagine us doing that here with a plane. I mean, I get enough calls about the helicopters as is, so I don't think I'd want to do that with any of the biplanes.
Okay, here's another tour. Someone is really into this. Do you do facilities tours?
We absolutely do, and that was one of the things I was going to tell you. I don't know if any of you here are interested in history, but if you were to come out to that was a joke. But if you want to come out to our headquarters, we're actually at the old Buckingham Army Airfield, and there is obviously a lot of history here. Or at that airfield. What exists now of the airfield is basically the parking lot. I mean, that's what we use as the runways for the bombers. So it is definitely something, if you'd like to come out and check it out as a group. We've kind of put a stop to tours now, obviously, because of what's going on with COVID. But we will definitely have groups come in the future, and we'll give you a whole tour of our labs. You can look at all of the aircraft that we have, and we have a really neat little museum that we set up that's totally dedicated to the airfield back in the 1940s.
Okay, we have so many questions. We should do a lightning round.
No, that's okay. I'll quit talking so much.
How did the gamma radiation process work out?
We didn't do gamma radiation.
Okay.
We did X-rays.
Okay.
Right. If we were doing gamma radiation, there's a whole set of protocols. I mean, we would have to have armed guards outside the facility. It's something that we didn't want to get into. There are other areas. University of Florida has looked at gamma radiation to sterilize, and that's what I should say. It's not like we're the only ones that are sterilizing mosquitoes to use it as control. We are the first to actually use X-ray technology with this particular mosquito. So there's actually genetic modification being done. There's a bacteria, Wolbachia, that can be inserted into a mosquito that can render them sterile. There's a lot of different methods that we're looking to use. The real benefit to sterile insect technique is that you don't have to use pesticides, so you don't have an issue with resistance. And there is no effect on non-target organisms because it's specific to that mosquito. It's not like a male mosquito is going to go mate with a dragonfly or go mate with another type of fly. It's specific to that.
Okay, we have some very specific ones. I know you will listen carefully.
Oh, boy.
What's the most effective product I can use on my person?
Okay. I would say it actually does come down to your personal preference, because if you don't like it, you're not going to use it. But I would say DEET, and this is just based on research, is the most effective. But it has to do with the percentage that you use. There was some research done showing that if you use DEET, which you all know, you can find in like Backwoods Off and some other brands, you go to a CVS or a Walgreens, you can get it. Look for something that has at least 29%. And I know that seems like a lot. I mean, I actually have, when you leave here, I've got a whole bunch of DEET wipes that are 30%. I mean, that's military grade, but that works. So I would say DEET. Another product to look for is called picaridin. If it has picaridin in it, that's known to be pretty effective. And then another one called IR 3535. So if you look for those, the ingredients that are in there, those are going to be the most effective repellents, at least in the research that we've done.
Okay, 2 more questions. One, I'll answer by saying go ahead and on the white table as you go out, take one of these. How do I help eliminate mosquitoes around my yard? Is there anything other than this?
I think we covered
Okay.
it. We spent a lot of time with that.
Then our final question, and this does not have to do with mosquitoes. How do you treat no-see-ums?
I knew that was the one I was waiting for. I will tell you what, I do believe that when we put a plane in the air or we put a helicopter out for adulticiding, or a truck is going down the road, chances are we are probably killing some no-see-ums. The issue is they're completely different type of fly than a mosquito and how they grow. So when we go and after the mosquito larvae, they're in water, whereas in the larvae of a no-see-um, or another common name would be a sandfly, we're not able to get to those. So there really isn't. I know that's not the answer you want, but there really isn't a great way to kill no-see-ums. It's just one of those things where repellents are going to be your best option, or putting a barrier on. I remember when I first started teaching at Sanibel, and I actually would park at the rec center in that parking lot, and then I would walk to the classroom. I mean, every time I live in Fort Myers, every time I would cross that bridge, I was like, this is just such a beautiful, I just can't even believe that I'm working here. You know, you cross the causeway, you come there, and you pull up to the school, and you park, and I get out of my Jeep, and I step out, and then I'm like, whoa. And then it was like constant, and I would run to the classroom, and it's like, okay, now this is something. It is beautiful, but it is painful. So.
This has been a real treat. As you leave, as I said on the little white table over there, this is Care for Your Yard. These have the required amount of DEET in them, and he said feel free to take those. And he said they do work on no-see-ums, so if they don't, here is a business card, also on the table.
That
you
one doesn't
can
have my name on it.
Oh, it doesn't have his name.
Yeah.
But I'm sure if you wanted to arrange a tour or ask questions,
Yes,
this
definitely.
would be the way. Thank you both very, very
thank
much.
you for having us.